four-course living. It's so good to be with you again. I've come into the kitchen, so as you know, what do I need to do? I need to wash my hands right away. Turn on my water, and I like my water a little warm. Get them wet. You only need one pump. Then you're going to wash your hands for 20 seconds or counting to 20 or the ABC song, but you're going to do it all in your head. So I've been thinking, okay, then I'm going to rinse my hands, turn off the water, and I'm going to use paper towel, and use a lot because wiping is really important. You want to get real dry. The soap loosens the germs on your hands, and the paper towels wipe those germs off. So there we go, and we are ready to get started with crispy chicken tenders. All right, first thing we need to do is take our recipe and check to see that we have all the ingredients. All right, my first thing is my chicken tenders, my corn flakes, chili powder, I've got that, garlic powder. Whoa, you know what? I don't have salt here. It's going to be back here. So it's a good thing I checked. Salt, and it calls for buttermilk, and I don't have buttermilk, so I am going to make buttermilk. All right, the next thing it says to do is preheat my oven. So I've turned on my oven over here to 450. So now I've got all my ingredients and I am ready to get started with my crispy chicken tenders. First thing that we're gonna do is we take the chicken tenders and we're gonna put them in this bag because chicken tenders are kind of fat in the middle and skinny at the edge. And we're going to flatten them out so that they cook better. They're going to be all about the same thickness. So I'm going to put them in this plastic bag. Doesn't really matter. You just want them one layer. You do not want more than one layer. And because I am going to bake these, I can use my fingers, my hands on it. But one of the things I have to remember to do is, when I get done, I am going to real quickly wash my hands again because chicken carries all kinds of bacteria on it. Alrighty, I'm going to wash my hands real quick. So, I've got my chicken, and I'm going to take a rolling pin and kind of pound them back and forth like this, getting them all about the same thickness. I guess you could roll them too, but I think it's easier just to use this as a pounder. You can do a lot at the same time. Okay, doesn't take a lot of pounding to get them so they're about the same thickness. All right, the next thing we're going to do is open our corn flakes. Now, I will tell you, if you have a bag of corn flakes, yes, you can tear it open. However, it makes a lot of sense to use your handy kitchen shears, and you can get these at a Dollar Tree for $1, and they are excellent. And you cut them open, it just makes everything neat. Nothing wrong with being neat. Now, it says we need 2 cups of cornflakes. So I'm going to take my cup, measure. Better get my bag. Oh, and it makes it easier if you kind of fold it over, kind of open your bag like this. If you had a second set of hands, somebody could hold it for you, but it works really well just to do it that way. So we just need 2 cups. And when you're measuring cornflakes like this, it doesn't have to be exact. Just dip in. And put them in there. All right, now what you need to do is we're gonna crush ours. So I like to get all the air out, so I kind of roll it up. And then I'm going to seal it, but I like to get most of the air out. And then you just use your hands and you get all your aggressions out by making it just as crunchy as you can. And you want it pretty fine. And my thought was, since I had my rolling pin out, and I really want it thin, I might as well use it. You wouldn't have to. But it certainly, I think it's easier than crushing with my hand. Ooh, yes. That is nice and small. Okay. Now, the next thing that it says to do is we're going to add chili powder and the garlic powder and salt. And it says, so what I'm going to do is make my little kind of dish so it's all open again. And it says a half teaspoon. So I have a half a teaspoon of chili powder. And again, on this one, I'm just gonna shake it a little bit, but it's not critical that it's perfect. Sometimes when you're baking, it's important to be perfect. And garlic powder, a half teaspoon of it. And a quarter teaspoon of salt. And I always use a little less. Now, most of the time when you're measuring like this, you don't want to put it over because you don't want the excess to get in there. In a recipe like this, it's okay. But if you don't want any extra, you should measure over a cup. And when we're making biscuits later, that's probably what Ann will do. Okay. Get all the seasonings and everything. Okay. There's that. The next thing we're going to do is make our buttermilk. And it doesn't take very long. It calls for a quarter of a cup of buttermilk. So I am going to put a quarter of a cup of milk in there. And it says to make this into buttermilk, you need, I have to check, a tablespoon of lemon juice. Some people could use vinegar. Lemon juice I always have, so. And you just put that in there and you just stir it around. And I don't think you can see, but it is getting thicker, and it's now buttermilk. Put our buttermilk in our dish. All right, I sprayed the pan so that these would not stick. I put foil down first just to make cleanup easier. And I've done, this is what they're gonna look like, and this is how I got to it. I made my little bowl. This is my buttermilk. I put my chicken in, dip it around, put in here. Last one. Kind of spread it out. My hands I'm going to rinse off. I don't need to really soap anything because I'm not handling any food this time. I'm going to bring it up. Then I have to shake until all that chicken is covered like these. And when you get to the end, sometimes it's a little harder to get them all covered. So we'll check it out. Oh yes, those are nice and covered. Put one there. Sometimes that one needs a little bit more. There's space right here. Now, there's a little empty spot there, so what I'm going to do is take just a little bit and kind of put it on there, and I push it down a little bit. But I don't see any other empty spots. Now, we are ready to put it in the oven. And we're going to put it in the oven and bake it for 15 minutes. And then we'll be back.
Well, hello, my name is Ann Bird, and it's been a long time since I've been with the 4-Course Living Group. It's nice to be back. And today we are going to make biscuits to go along with the chicken that we're going to have with our meal. One of the things I like to do, of course, you're going to always have your recipe with you and review it before you start cooking. I see that we have to have a preheated oven, so I've gone ahead and started the oven at 450. And then just like Jean told you, what we want to do next is make sure we have all our ingredients ready to use. So we've got flour, we've got our baking powder, it calls for salt, and sugar, shortening, and this might look a little different from what you've seen. Often shortening comes in kind of a round can with a plastic lid. These are almost like sticks of butter, and they have little measurements on the side, so it makes it a lot easier to measure this out than what we usually use for shortening. And then finally, we have milk. The other thing I like to do is make sure I have all the equipment that I'm going to need for the day. So I've kind of mentally read the recipe and gotten everything out, and that way I'm not running back and forth trying to open drawers and things in my kitchen. So the first thing we do, and this is true in many, many baking recipes, we measure our dry ingredients all together in a bowl. And there are some special things we need to know about measuring dry ingredients. We need 2 cups of flour. And there are a couple different philosophies about measuring flour. People love to debate about it. My favorite is to spoon it. And I'm fluffing the flour up a little bit because we don't want it to be packed down. So I'm going to spoon it like this. Sometimes it gets a little messy. This is my 1 cup measure. Okay. It's getting close to the top, so I'm kind of dipping down in here. I hate to waste food, so. Okay, we don't heap it, we want it to be level. So we just take a nice flat edge, like the edge of this spoon. Yes, I'm getting it all over the place. And we make it nice and level. Okay, so we have 1 cup here. That's one way to measure flour. A second way, and people will debate that this is the correct way, is to dip it. So we'll just dip it right down in there. You can see that it's mounded up a little bit, just like when we spooned it, so we're going to level it off. Okay, oops. And there's actually a third way. Some people swear that you should always weigh out your ingredients. That's a little bit picky. What you shouldn't do with flour or other dry ingredients that are fluffy, you shouldn't pat them down. You don't want to shake them around a lot. I don't know if you can see this, but when I start tapping it, it actually lowers. So now if I tried to fill it out and level it, I'd actually be putting in more flour. So we want the flour to be sort of lightened up a little bit. Okay, so we have our flour in here now. We need a tablespoon of baking powder. Baking powder is a little bit like flour. It's rather fluffy. So we're just going to scoop our tablespoon in, and we want it to be level. So I'm going to just take the edge of this spoon and level it off. Okay. Next ingredient is a half a teaspoon of salt. I don't have a super steady hand, so I'm not going to measure mine over my dry ingredients, because if I had a little blip, I might dump a lot in there that I don't want. So I'm going to measure it over this little cup. And I'm a little bit like Jean. I usually put in a little less than what it calls for. And with salt, it's granular, so you can kind of make it nice and flat by just shaking it a little bit. Put that in. Okay, now we got our salt in. This recipe calls for 2 tablespoons of sugar. That is optional. Frankly, after I tried the recipe, I think it's fine without the sugar. I don't think we need the sweetness or the extra calories. So if you're sensitive about that, you can leave it out. We need 2 tablespoons. We're going to go ahead and make it like the recipe calls for. Sugar is sort of like salt. It's granular, so it doesn't really pack down very well. So you can just shake it and make it nice and even. There's 1 tablespoon, 2 tablespoons. Okay, and as I mentioned, when we're baking, it's very common to get all your dry ingredients together, and then you want to mix them. Because we have a lot of flour in here, just a little bit of salt, and not so much sugar and baking powder. So before we add anything else, we want to mix this together. I like to use a whisk to do that, but you can use a spoon or just about anything. Okay, we got that all mixed together. Now, our recipe wants us to add the shortening. And we are going to be what's called cutting the shortening into the flour. And what that basically does is it chops the shortening up into little bitty pieces and coats it with the flour. There are a couple of different ways to do this. Now, I'm kind of lucky today because we happen to have a half a cup right here. So I don't have to measure it. But if you're going to use it out of the standard can, you can take a spatula or a knife, and you want to pat that shortening down because it'll create little air pockets. And if you have air pockets, you don't have the correct amount. So you want to pat it down real quick. That's very different than what we did with the flour, isn't it? Once it's all patted down and you're sure you don't have air pockets, you also level it off like that. And then make sure that you scrape as much of it in as you can. Okay, let's see if we can get this baby open. Very much like butter. Some people, when they make biscuits, argue that butter is better for making biscuits than shortening. You can try both ways and see what you like best. And that's a little sticky. Okay. I like to start out, let's get that out of the way, and just cut that shortening up a little bit and sort of distribute it around the dry ingredient mixture. Now, there are a couple different ways to cut it in, and we want to cut it in so that we have pea-sized pieces in our mixture. One way is just to take 2 knives, kind of hold them together like that, and just keep cutting and cutting. Find all those bigger chunks of shortening and cut through them with your knife. Occasionally you have to scrape them off. A second way to do it is just to take a regular old knife and cut it that way. You can turn the knife sideways a little bit. You can mash it down like this.
Fork.
A fork. Did I say knife? Thank you. This is a fork. Okay. And the third way, if you have a kitchen that has lots of equipment in it, you might have a pastry blender. This is probably the fastest way to do it. The only downside to me to a pastry blender is they're a little harder to clean, and I'm kind of lazy when it comes to cleaning things up. But it's also a little faster way to do it. So we're going to just keep cutting through this with our pastry blender until we have pea-sized pieces of our dry ingredients and our shortening. Now, you can sort of use this for a workout. So you could change hands because you know you want to work out both sides equally. And mash it down with your other hand for a while. All right, I think we're getting about where we want to be. We'll just go around the bowl one more time. Make sure we've got little sort of pea-sized pieces. So the shortening is now all broken up and it's coated with our dry ingredients. And we want to make sure that we keep as much of our ingredients as possible, not throw those away. All right. Our next step is to add the milk, and stir. The recipe calls for 2/3 of a cup of milk. And you guys probably already know about measuring liquid ingredients, but we want to look at the measure at eye level. Okay, because if I look at it from up here, it looks like it's actually more than 2/3 of a cup. But if I look at it straight on, it's 2/3 of a cup. So that's why all liquid ingredients, always look at them level with your measuring device. Okay, we're going to make a little well. We're going to pour our milk in, and then using the fork, we're going to stir it just until everything is moistened. It's going to be rather messy. The reason that you don't want to mix this a lot is it'll start to make it tough. So once we add the milk, we want to be real gentle with our dough. I think some people describe biscuits that are over mixed or over kneaded as hockey pucks. All right. So you can see we've pretty much got all of the dry ingredients moistened, but it's really not stuck together like a dough yet. Now we're ready to knead it. Okay. Now, we're going to have our next steps where we're going to knead the dough a little bit, and kneading the dough just gets it in a nice little ball and allows you to roll it out without it all falling apart. And the most important thing about biscuits is we don't want to over knead it. It will make them tough. So it's very different than if you make a yeast bread. You know when you make a yeast bread, you work it and work it and work it because you want to get the gluten going. Not so with your biscuits. The other little hint, I take all my rings off before I do this because it's kind of hard to keep your hands clean. So we're going to just try to gather our dough up in a little ball. We're going to put it on this mat to roll it out. But if your kitchen countertop is really, really clean, you can use a nice smooth kitchen countertop the same way. We're going to throw a little flour on here because this is sticky and we don't want it to stick. And plunk. spatula left. Okay. You can see we still have a lot of dryness here, and that's okay. That's not a bad thing. Okay, we're gonna make this nice little ball. Here's how you knead. You take the heels of your hands, push down in the middle, and then fold the top over and turn it 1/4. We're not gonna knead this more than 10 times, preferably 6 to 8. So that was 1, 2, 3, 4. Can you see that it's starting to hold together a little bit better? I think that was 6, 7, and 8. Okay, so now it doesn't look quite as ooey gooey and sticky, but we've used up some of that flour. You want to be a little stingy with the flour, but you want to have enough on here that your dough doesn't stick to it. And now we're going to roll this out, and I'm going to try to roll this into a triangle or a square rather than a circle, because I learned something new last night about cutting the biscuits. So we're going to try a bit of an experiment today. Now you don't want to push down super hard, just gently roll back and forth. And then once in a while, lift your dough up. You can see how it's picked up some of the flour. Just put a little bit more down. Turn your dough over, and I usually put a little bit also on your rolling pin. Okay, a little bit. And we want this to be about 1 inch thick. Some people like thinner biscuits, and if you like yours thinner, you can do about 1/2 inch. That works well too. It's totally your personal preference. Okay, now, what we traditionally do is we use a cookie cutter or a biscuit cutter, or you can just use a little glass and you can cut your biscuits out like this. Okay? We're going to put them on this cookie sheet, but the problem with that is as we cut out all of the little round pieces, then we have a lot of dough left over. We have to put it back together, roll it back out, and every time we do that, we add more flour to it and we handle it more. So we're making our biscuits tougher and tougher. So what I read last night was you can take a knife and make square biscuits. And we're going to try that today because I just thought that was a brilliant idea. So let's make about 3-inch biscuits. Just going to cut our dough this way. Try to make them a nice uniform size. We're still going to have a little bit of excess that we probably need to re-roll, but not as much as if we're cutting round biscuits. I don't know why people haven't done this forever, except we always think biscuits should be round. And they need to be just a teeny bit, maybe 1 inch apart on your cookie sheet. Okay. Now you can just re-roll this guy. Again, try to be real gentle with it. But you do have to work it a little bit to get it to all stick together. And we're going to try to roll that out again in somewhat of a rectangle instead of a circle. Okay, he's about 1 inch thick. I think we're just going to get maybe 1 more biscuit out of this. Now, we don't waste stuff at my house, so what I would probably do is just go ahead and put these funny pieces on, because if you have any people at your house that love it when you're baking, they never mind eating the funny looking stuff. So I'm just going to stick those on here. We are then going to pop these in the oven for about 10 minutes until they're nice and golden brown. And then we're going to take them out in a few minutes and have some.
I just took the chicken tenders out of the oven after 15 minutes. And now I have to check to see that the chicken is at 165 degrees Fahrenheit. I have two kinds of thermometers. This is the one that most people have, and it takes a lot longer to read, but you do it the same way. You put it in this way, sideways, and you kind of look and see. It's at 165. The instant read one like this closes up. Those are even better, but you put them in still the same way on the side. And it says 165. All right. Now, Anne has taken her biscuits out of the oven, and she's going to show you what they look like.
Two quick things about baking anything in the oven. Just because the recipe says 10 minutes doesn't mean 10 minutes is exactly right. The size of what you're cooking, the temperature of your oven makes a little bit of difference. So always watch what you're cooking. If my recipe calls for 10 minutes, I generally maybe set a timer for 8 or 9 minutes and check it early to see how they're coming along. Also, if you can, get an oven thermometer and put it inside your oven. My home oven runs hot, so if a recipe calls for 350 degrees, I know I have to set it at 335, because if I set it at 350, it's going to be way too hot. So get to know your oven. So here are our biscuits, and you can see that they have a nice brown top to them. And let's see, let me pick this guy up. He's one of our funky throwaway ones, and we're going to break him open. You can see how he's kind of flaky inside. And when you are cutting the shortening into it, that's what you're doing, is you're making it so that shortening will be spaced in between your flour, and it gives you that nice little fluffy look to it. You could put some butter on those, or you could take some butter and mix a little honey in it, have honey butter, have people spread that on their biscuits, and enjoy. And I hope you'll try the square thing. I think I'm going to do that again. Thank you.
Perfect.